must-see TV. Like anytime he was on TV, like it was must-see. And
WGN.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. He just had this charisma on top of all the gifts and skills and mentally, you know, how great he is. I mean, playing against him, the one thing that I think that he was unlike any other player I've ever played against is that there was a real fear playing against him. Like people, I've never seen like the league be kind of fearful of a player or have that much reverence for a player. No matter who you know has come since then, you know, that was a different feeling when you're playing Mike, because you just knew, you know, like there was such a seriousness and competitiveness and fire in him. And, you know, there was a fear with how that was going to manifest itself potentially on any given night. So he was, I mean, where do you want to start and where do you want to finish with him? He was everything. It's tricky. You know, I think MJ's my guy for sure. Always, you know, when you talk about LeBron and Kobe, like I totally understand why people have LeBron where he is, either first or second in many people's eyes. You know, when you look at the whole picture of everything LeBron's done over the course of his career, it's hard to argue with. I think at his best, Kobe was right up there with any of them. You know, you know, I don't know where the knock is, but you know, he when he was flying and playing at his best, you know, he was as good as we've ever seen. So I don't know. I think you probably have me saying Jordan, LeBron, Kobe on the total picture, but I mean, how do you go wrong? At their best, they're all three of them. At their best, all three of them have played the game at a level higher than you know, anyone else in the world.
Right.
There are legends who build the foundation, and then there are giants whose legacy becomes the platform every generation after them stands on. That's the reality Steve Nash was speaking to when he delivered his brutally honest assessment. Nash, a two-time MVP and one of the most cerebral minds the game has ever produced, wasn't reaching for poetry. He was stating something he lived through firsthand. Greatness doesn't get invented from scratch. It gets inherited, absorbed, and passed forward. And in basketball, no figure casts a longer shadow than Michael Jordan, the man Nash identifies as the greatest, not because of statistics or highlight reels, but because he fundamentally changed the atmosphere of the entire sport. For anyone who grew up watching basketball in the 1990s, Jordan wasn't simply an athlete you followed. He was a global event. Every Chicago Bulls game carried a weight that had nothing to do with the standings. You didn't just watch Michael Jordan, you anticipated him. You felt the tension building before he even touched the ball. The world seemed to slow down the moment he stepped onto the floor, and that was happening long before social media existed to amplify anything. That's where the real GOT conversation has to begin, not with numbers, but with the kind of presence that reshapes a sport's entire identity. Then Nash said something that tends to stop people mid-sentence. He admitted that Jordan inspired something he had genuinely never witnessed anywhere else in the league. Fear. Not respect, not admiration, actual fear. The kind that rewires how an opponent approaches a game before it even starts. Statistics can fuel debates, but that level of psychological dominance is something different entirely. Longevity can be measured. Fear can be seen in body language, in hesitation, in the eyes of world-class athletes who already knew the outcome before the ball went up. The aura Jordan carried didn't just affect players, it filled arenas. There was a sense of inevitability that followed him everywhere. Fans leaning forward in their seats, defenders tightening up, referees feeling the weight of the moment. And then he'd start moving, gliding past you, cutting through a defense with footwork precise enough to dismantle everything before the shot even left his hand, leaving opponents feeling like they were standing in quicksand with no way out. What made it worse was his killer instinct. Jordan didn't simply want to win, he wanted to dismantle your confidence completely. That cold stare, that quiet smile, it communicated something words couldn't. He was coming, and there was nothing you were going to do about it. And the most unsettling part was never knowing exactly how it would happen. Maybe he'd drop 50 from every angle on the floor. Maybe he'd lock down your offense until it stopped functioning. Or maybe he'd hit the shot that didn't just end your night, but erased whatever belief you had that you ever belonged in the same building. That's the separation. LeBron James is admired. Kobe Bryant earned deep respect and carried his own menace, but Jordan made entire rosters uneasy before tip-off, reducing decorated professionals to hesitant versions of themselves the second he made eye contact. He didn't just beat teams, he consumed their belief that winning was even possible. And all of this was built inside the hardest era the league has ever seen. Jordan didn't rise during a forgiving period of basketball. He came up in a league defined by physical punishment, hand-checking, grabbing, shoving, and referees who let the brutality play out. Driving to the basket wasn't a highlight opportunity, it was a confrontation. Fouls weren't just fouls, they were statements. At the center of that chaos stood the Detroit Pistons, who constructed what became known as the Jordan Rules, a specific blueprint designed not to slow Jordan down, but to make him pay physically for every single point. Bill Laimbeer, Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman, these weren't just defenders, they were enforcers, sending a clear message. You might score, but you're going to feel every basket long after the game is over. Most players would have broken under that sustained punishment. Jordan rebuilt himself. He transformed his body, added strength, and evolved from a graceful, instinctive scorer into a physical force who refused to be worn down. He took what the Pistons threw at him and used it as raw material, forging himself into something even more difficult to stop. By the time the early 90s arrived, he wasn't just the most gifted offensive player in the league, he was its most relentless competitor, a player who had learned to absorb pain and convert it directly into fuel. And he'd get back up off that hardwood floor with a smile, because he understood that every hit was making him harder to stop. That's exactly why the question Nash raises cuts so deep. What standard are we actually using to judge greatness? If today's stars were dropped into that same environment, into the Jordan Rules, into the elbows of the Knicks, the dynasty-level resistance of the Celtics, the sheer muscle of the Lakers, could they survive it? Jordan didn't just survive, he took ownership of the most punishing era the sport has ever produced and turned it into a stage where he collected 6 championships that carry a weight no statistic can fully capture. Each one felt carved out of something hard, earned against genuine giants, forged under real fire. He wasn't just the most gifted player of his generation, he was its greatest survivor. And in that iron era, surviving at that level was its own form of dominance.
Which leads directly to the moment Nash laid out his personal ranking. No hesitation, no hedging. Jordan first, LeBron second, Kobe third. He delivered it with a quiet conviction that said more than the list itself. Nash had seen all 3 up close, Jordan near the end of his run, Kobe at the absolute peak of his powers, and LeBron ascending into his own era of dominance. And still, the answer was clear to him. Because Jordan represented something beyond accolades, the perfect finals record, unmatched command in the league's most brutal period, and a psychological edge that nobody else came close to replicating. Kobe captured Jordan's aesthetic more than anyone, the footwork, the fadeaway, the cold stare, the obsessive mentality. But Nash described him as the reflection, not the source. Kobe studied Jordan like sacred text, absorbing his movements, his mindset, even the subtle rhythm of how he carried himself. At times, the resemblance was so precise, the foot shuffle, the pull-up jumper, the tongue-out finish, that it genuinely felt like watching Jordan reborn for a new generation. But Kobe himself never disputed the deeper truth. Everything he became traced back to Jordan. He was the echo who proved that Jordan's formula of talent, obsession, and killer instinct could translate across any era, carrying that fire into the 2000s against forces like Shaquille O'Neal, Tim Duncan, and a league rapidly shifting toward speed and perimeter play. He gave the world the Mamba mentality, a living tribute to the flame that shaped him. But within that tribute was an honest acknowledgement. There is only one original spark, and every great who followed, no matter how iconic, is still chasing the same unreachable shadow. LeBron received his flowers from Nash as well, genuine ones. Nearly 2 decades as the face of the league, carrying franchises, making 10 finals appearances, winning 4 championships, breaking the all-time scoring record, building schools, and using his platform in ways that extended far beyond basketball. That's admiration that's been fully earned. But as Nash made clear, admiration and fear are not the same currency. When teams prepared to face LeBron, they respected everything he brought: the vision, the size, the versatility, the sheer intelligence of how he played. But they walked onto the floor believing, at minimum, that a chance existed. Against Jordan, that belief didn't survive the warm-up. Players hoped, they prayed, they survived the night if they were fortunate. LeBron has 6 finals losses. Jordan never dropped a single series at that stage. LeBron is celebrated for doing everything at an elite level across an extraordinary stretch of time. Jordan was celebrated for being the definitive best at everything. Greatness compressed into something close to perfection rather than stretched across longevity. 6 finals, 6 finals MVPs, not a single Game 7. Longevity without that dimension of intimidation cannot outweigh dominance that broke teams psychologically before the opening tip. LeBron is a titan. Jordan was the storm itself. And then came the last dance, and Nash described what it did to people with precision. It wasn't just entertainment, it wasn't simply a documentary. It was a time machine that pulled an entire generation back into the 1990s in a way that didn't just make you remember being young, it made you feel it again. The locker room speeches that had never been seen, the private rivalries, the intensity that never once eased up, even behind closed doors. Pulling that curtain back didn't shrink the legend, it expanded it, because what people saw wasn't a flawless figure. It was someone who was deeply human, driven by frustration and obsession and raw emotion, demanding perfection from everyone around him while refusing to accept anything less from himself. Not always gentle, not always easy, but completely, undeniably impossible to look away from. And long after his final shot in a Chicago Bulls uniform, the world still couldn't look away. That's not nostalgia. That's what real legacy actually looks like. So when Steve Nash raised the GOAT question, asking what standard we're even measuring by, the debate suddenly became sharper focus, because the answer changes depending on what you value most. If dominance is the benchmark, Michael Jordan stands completely alone, an undefeated finals record, an aura that altered the psychology of opponents before a single point was scored. No other player in the history of the sport has operated at that level without a single blemish on the biggest stage. If longevity and accumulated achievement define greatness, then LeBron James makes an undeniable case after more than 2 decades of rewriting what's considered possible for a basketball player, physically, statistically, and culturally. And if mentality is the measuring stick, Kobe Bryant stands closest to the original, the one who absorbed Jordan's blueprint more completely than anyone else and carried that fire forward into his own era with everything he had. But within that tribute was an honest acknowledgement. There is only one original spark, and every great who followed, no matter how iconic, is still chasing the same unreachable shadow. So when Steve Nash raised the GOAT question, asking what standard we're even measuring by, the debate suddenly became sharper focus. Because the answer changes depending on what you value most. If dominance is the benchmark, Michael Jordan stands completely alone. An undefeated finals record, an aura that altered the psychology of opponents before a single point was scored. No other player in the history of the sport has operated at that level without a single blemish on the biggest stage. If longevity and accumulated achievement define greatness, then LeBron James makes an undeniable case after more than 2 decades of rewriting what's considered possible for a basketball player, physically, statistically, and culturally. And if mentality is the measuring stick, Kobe Bryant stands closest to the original, the one who absorbed Jordan's blueprint more completely than anyone else and carried that fire forward into his own era with everything he had. But within that tribute was an honest acknowledgement. There is only one original spark, and every great who followed, no matter how iconic, is still chasing the same unreachable shadow.